From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Welcome to the UK Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Peter Kelly. I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined by my fellow Southern Hemisphere legend, Hayley Farrell.
Hi Pete, how are you doing?
I'm all right. Do you know, it'd be of an interest to Australian listeners, but clearly Australia has won the Ashes over here by default because of the rain. I'm very happy. Taking a bit of abuse, but you know what? It's okay. I can handle that. My South African personal trainer this morning was giving me a bit, so I said, this is just like being with Hayley.
I'm not that hard on you, Pete. Come on.
No, absolutely not. But he definitely is. He said it's not good enough. You need to be faster, Peter. And I'm like, have you seen how old I am? Anyway, so I've been personal training, and then went for a run. I'm doing the Couch to 5K.
Fantastic.
I'm just trying to apply some of the principles that we have. But you are a personal trainer, and that really is like a warm up for you, isn't it, Hayley?
You know what? I actually haven't been as active over the past couple of months. I've been taking it easy, to be honest. I'm just trying to find a balance. I think many of our listeners might be able to relate with so much going on. It's about finding that balance and not doing something from a place of I have to move, because it becomes a very different feeling when you think about I have to versus I'm able to, or I am grateful that my body allows me to move. So I'm trying to just reframe my own personal thoughts around exercise, slowly but surely getting back into it. But the other interesting thing, Pete, when we talk about exercise is I love weightlifting, right? It's just my thing. However, it is something that raises your cortisol. So when you work in a stressful environment, to go straight to the gym and lift some weights, when the cortisol levels are quite high, it's just quite consistent. So it's something I've been quite conscious about as well. So tip of the day.
I just don't lift weights, Hayley. The most I've done is 50 kilos, but as I only weigh 80 kilos, I was quite impressed.
Absolutely.
And I probably spent a lifetime doing the first bit of what you said, which is avoiding that activity. So, Hayley, tell us who we've got today.
I'm delighted to invite our guest today onto the podcast. So we've got Jonathan Hill joining us from Anglian Water. And Anglian Water is the first water company to achieve certification for the ISO 45003 standard. So we're really excited to hear a little bit about Jonathan's journey and just hear from him about the experience of operationalizing it. So welcome, Jonathan.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for having me on your podcast. Absolutely delighted at Anglian Water to be one of the first water companies, huge team effort, and it was a great process, and we certainly learned a lot going through it. So my name's Jonathan Hill. I'm head of Occupational Health at Anglian Water, and I look after a great team. We've got 7 Occ Health advisors and a small operational team, and like most Occ Health sort of goals are. We want to reduce sickness absence, and we do that through management referrals and early intervention. We also help the company fulfill their legal requirements. We do that by completing certain health surveillance, and we have a role in health promotion as well. So being an in-house function, we've got strong links with our safety teams, inclusion teams and wellbeing teams. And Anglian Water as a company, there's about 5,000 employees. And this is mainly split between office and field-based staff, around 50-50 sort of percentage split. And we cover quite a large geographical area, a real diverse workforce with so many different types of job roles. We've got people that work in water recycling, people that work in water services, customer and wholesale, and we even have a priest on our payroll. And that's because we've got some really nice reservoirs that have parks attached to it, and Rutland Water is one that has a little chapel on where people can get married.
Yeah, right. Just such a diverse range of colleagues, I think. So I think makes for a very interesting space to have to operationalize something like this in terms of needs assessment and understanding the hazards in all of the different areas in which you serve. So very interesting. Thanks, Jonathan.
Jonathan, what does a dynamic risk assessment look like on a wedding? Getting married at a reservoir. What does that look like?
I think alcohol and water risk certainly sort of plays a part. You have to get married in life jackets.
Yes, exactly. This is what I think. You have to wear a life jacket when you get married.
As long as they're white, if they're white, it can blend in.
It'll work.
So once a health and safety inspector, always a health and safety inspector. So, that's marvelous. And thank you for introducing yourself and giving us a little bit of where you sit within Anglian Water. I just thought I'd start off with a really easy question for you, and that is, Jonathan, what is the business case for investment employee health and well-being in the UK businesses? So it's quite an easy question, clearly.
Sure, of course, yeah, very easy. Thank you. I think it's well known that employees are, the company's greatest asset, and all companies or line managers want to do is retain and attract the kind of best talent that's out there. So most CFOs or CEOs know that it's the right thing to do. And you've got that famous Richard Branson quote about, if you take care of your employees, they'll take care of your clients. And all of that feels very subjective. And there's more of a desire now to have some sort of hard data or objective measurements about what is your ROI, your return on investment that you're putting into health and well-being. A lot of it's about data, and I don't think we know exactly what data, but it probably is around sickness absence, attrition rates, compensation claims, cost of healthcare. And that's all, they're kind of direct costs, but it gets harder when you want to measure things like presenteeism, lost productivity, which are a lot more intangible, I guess. So it will be different for different organisations, depending on the size and what data is available. But I think the aim has to be around finding out what the hazards are, what's the causation of poor ill health. So it's not just about stress, but what are the driving factors behind that. And what we're starting to see a lot more of is that question being flipped on its head, as far as there's a lot more positive framing. So instead of talking about stress, anxiety, depression, at Anglian Water, we're talking about calming, happiness and thriving. And the question's less about the cost of ill health, but the size of the prize when we get it right. So Anglian Water sit on the leadership group for business in the community, BITC, and their latest report was about prioritising people, and that explores the EVP for placing employees at the heart of the organisation. So they believe when you get it right, there's anything between £4,000 and £12,000 that could be made per employee, which is huge. And when we get it right, there is that knock-on effect of increased health is going to lead to increased employee happiness, increased performance, increased productivity, and then that all has a big impact on the economy. So one of the reasons I really enjoy what I do is because the small interactions that my team have with individuals has a big knock-on effect as much as impacting the economy. So it's really important that we do get it right. I think the other thing that's quite interesting to look at, my partner, she works in recruitment, and at interview stage, the reasons and the questions that people are asking are very, very different now, sort of post-pandemic. So it's not so much about the paycheck and the salary, it's more about finding a company that has a good purpose and a good culture. It's not so much about having managers that manage people, but they will coach them for their development. And, people are seeing their job as part of their life. So really, really important that their health is supported throughout, I guess.
I absolutely love what is the size of the prize when we get it right. I'm going to completely and utterly use that when I'm having conversations, because it is so true, isn't it? We focus on the obvious negatives, was actually, but I don't know what you think, Hayley. When the size of the price is right, eh? We could do a whole podcast on that.
I mean, it's great to hear, Jonathan talking about working with BITC. We had Louise on the call, on our podcast actually, probably about 4 weeks ago, Jonathan, and she was actually sharing the whole report. And I think BITC have really, really grown in the space to be able to collect data, working with McKinsey Health as well. I remember when they launched the first, what if your job was good for you? Then your job is good for you. And now the new report, and really helps answer the question we asked you, what is the business case for investment? So great to see that is part of Anglian Water's thinking, especially when you've just been successful and certified for 45,003. But I also just love the way that you are starting to see this reframed thinking, especially in such an operational space. I mean, I used to work for MCOR UK, so I know that Anglian Water, one of our clients, and I know some of the challenges that the environment brings. So it's wonderful to see that those conversations are happening. And I think the resilience of people and the understanding of how we think about some of this stuff, and the responsibility of the individual, but the responsibility of the business in terms of that root cause as well. So really just, I think, such a positive space to hear from, and that you're kind of influencing at the moment.
No, definitely. Yeah. From an occupational health world, there's very much can be a medical model where we're focused on illnesses and what people can't do. And, as part of that, we're trying to ensure that people do have lots of abilities to do things despite poor health, keep them in work.
Fantastic. So I'd love to hear your views of psychological health and safety as a concept, and also the role it plays in well-being.
Sure. I think as a concept, it's probably been maybe missing or poorly managed, especially compared to other areas of health and safety. So we're really, really good at identifying and managing physical health and safety or occupational health and safety. So whether that's a biological, chemical, ergonomic, or even occupational health conditions such as dermatitis or occupational asthma, these type of conditions are a little bit more black and white, or there's a real direct cause and effect. But with psychological health and safety, it's a lot more multifactorial. And I don't think it's a new concept. It's just been reframed, or it's been siloed to a certain part of the business. But essentially, it should be rooted in everything that we do. It should be involved in every process. So at Anglian Water, we talk about employees being happier, healthier, and safer. When we talk about happier, that's the employees' mental well-being, covers things like financial well-being and social connection. When we talk about healthier, that's all about their physical health, and we like to talk about industrial athletes. And safer is about risk assessment, slowing down, making sure that no job is too important that we can't do it safely. So happier, healthier, safer, it acts like a tripod. But for me, it's that happier element that kind of interconnects it all, acts like a bit of a glue, keeping them all together. So yeah, reflecting on the question, I think I would have answered it very differently before and after the ISO 45003. So before, I would have very much talked about psychological safety. And for me, that's sort of bringing your whole self to work, or as much as you want to, because there's certain things you want to keep at home, I'm sure, like most people. But it's that belief that you won't be humiliated for speaking up, with ideas, questions, or more importantly, when things go wrong. And that sounds like a great concept. But what isn't talked about so much is that may cause a bit of conflict. And I think we need to see the positivity in conflict, in the sense that it can help create new ideas, or it fosters creativity. And there's an example I heard recently about the Rolling Stones, rock and roll band, and they had Jagger and Richards, and they had very different ideas how they want to take the band forward. And one was very much the rock, and the other one was the roll. And despite the conflict, it obviously led to a very successful kind of career in band. And there's a great book, The Fearless Organisation by Amy Edmondson, which gives some other great examples like this. So I think early on in the book, she talks about a neonatal nurse that was very fearful of speaking up for fear of humiliation in front of a consultant. And in the short term, she felt great. She didn't have to feel that kind of anxiety about being humiliated or spoken down to. But in the long term, tragically, the baby died. And it just highlights that importance of psychological sort of safe environment. But now, having done the ISO 45003, the concept of psychological health and safety goes back to causation, risk assessment, and kind of standards. So during the assessment, we had to demonstrate what psychological risk assessment have we got, what hazards that exist, the level of harm, who was affected, and then what kind of primary, secondary, and tertiary measures we had in place. So it was a little bit like the HSE stress management standards in 2004, but on steroids. It's kind of a real kind of in-depth view of the level of hazards that exist. And and they really help you out with giving you sort of template examples. But what it did for us to provide a framework of best practice on identifying psychosocial hazards. We now have a toolkit that can evolve with time. And yeah, what we found, it's not just down to the Occ Health team, the HR team, the wellbeing team, inclusion, whoever it might be. There's a real shared responsibility across the whole of the business to identify these hazards and, make sure that appropriate action is taken, really.
Shout out to you for differentiating between psychological safety and psychological health and safety. Thank you.
A mega shout out for telling me that the management standards, which I helped develop, are now on steroids. That's and
should have done my research there.
They're just getting into their 20s. They're just going into their 20s. Yeah, but absolutely. We've talked about this before, but 45,003 was what we should have put in when we had the standards, but we didn't have that. So it is the standards on steroids. You'll come up with some absolute crackers. But it is exactly that. So standards on steroids.
No, we're not going to hear the end of this now, Pete, are we?
What's the prize? What is the prize at the end? Thank you.
I might transfer to marketing.
Yeah, well, you know what? Everyone likes a good tagline, so that's exceptional. Obviously, you can't see it, but Hayley gets these twitchy things where you're like, I want to ask something, so I'm just checking.
No, I'm just absorbing. I think it's wonderful. When we were certified when I was at MCOR a couple of years ago, well, probably about a year and a half ago now, and it's great just to, you're always learning, and you can always learn something new because it's different organizations, it's different experiences, and it's just, I think, the more and more practitioners in the space who are implementing, getting certified, understanding the impact and where it sits. I love how Jonathan mentioned, it's not just within the wellbeing space or within the health and safety team. It really is intersectional, and it relies on the whole business to do this work, psychosocial hazard identification, and then being able to control and manage that. So just excited for the space to continue to evolve, and lots of food for thought. Thank you, Jonathan. But I do think the next question, Pete, you're going to ask, Jonathan's kind of started to touch on it. Yeah.
He has. I mean, and I'm interested, obviously, because for those, both of you have now been through that process, but, the first bit is that gap analysis of finding out where you're at. The second bit is applying yourself to the definitions that are there so you can show. I'm interested to know, Jonathan, then given your experience, both that you are in a unique small cohort at the moment, given your experience, how do organisations operationalise psych health and safety? And it's fascinating because obviously we know how we operationalise that from a regulator perspective when I was a regulator, but how do you operationalise it?
Yeah, firstly, you need that buy-in from the business. So you need your senior stakeholders involved. And when you do that, you need to get across the impact of doing something, what that impact's going to be, but more importantly, the impact of not doing it. And that's where the why really comes in. It must be accessible and easy to use. So it shouldn't be seen as a standalone kind of piece of work. It needs to be integrated into the current management systems and processes that we already have. And when you do that, it makes it business as usual. And if it is accessible, then it has to be inclusive, and that's where you get the D&I teams involved as well. The second thing, I think it really needs to be as simple and understandable. So under that kind of umbrella term of simple, communication is really important. So avoiding jargon. We don't really want to be asking employees what their psychosocial health is all about. There's still a bit of a stigma, and that where it goes back to some of that positive framing. So one of the biggest challenges we have is the wide geographical area we have and the diverse workforce. So comms have to be tailored, kind of depending on maybe the job role or the way they access the information. There's lots of different ways our employees now access information. And the third thing, we need sort of great leadership. So we're quite good at ensuring that health and safety is top of the agenda for every board meeting and every kind of health and safety network meeting that we have as well, which is good. But yeah, going through this process of ISO 45003, what was really interesting is that we already have lots in place that we didn't think linked to psychological safety. Once we knew, actually that does work, we can fit that into our framework. Now let's consider, the well-being impact that it has. And then the next step is making sure that employees are aware that how it's all interconnected. So that was one of the things that we might not have realized until we'd gone through the process.
Couldn't agree more. I think that's often something I say is there's a lot of stuff already in place, but it's about pulling it all together and making sure people understand, especially when it comes to control measures. I think organizations are great at putting control measures in place, but they're not always great at linking it to the hazard that it can mitigate or that it can terminate. And sometimes it's the other way around. We put something in place without actually knowing what the need is. And therefore you can end up with a wide suite of things that are available, but they're not actually addressing that kind of root cause. So I think you're right. There is a lot that organizations might already be doing, but it's about how do you demonstrate that it actually addresses work-related hazards. So good shout. Peter?
Yeah, Jonathan, I want to ask you a question that you probably weren't expecting, but I've got you now. So your focus on well-being, how did you find moving the whole concept of well-being into 45003 when you were going through the assessment process? Because what I realised, or what I keep saying to people, is a lot of what you do in well-being is transferable into the prevention space as well as the promote and protect, which is the World Health Organization's result. So primary, secondary, and tertiary, and we kind of forget that. And is that your experience? Because literally, you can, without realizing, actually be doing prevention through some of your well-being activities.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies take a backwards approach to a lot of these things. So we always start off with the resources and then find ourselves working backwards. So we're a big fan of wellness action plans, but they came about from wellness recovery action plans for people back to work. And then it took a step backwards for proactive conversations, which were wellness action plans. And now it's taken another step back to things like disability passports. And yeah, I see it in lots of different things. It's kind of, instead of starting with that framework at the beginning, we're kind of working backwards then to complete that framework. And I guess to answer your question is that defining what well-being is and who does that involve? And when we gained this accreditation, it was a real team effort. We had to pull in all those different people from different areas of the business to help us understand, actually, we do have these things in place and they do fit into our framework. Can that psychosocial health element just be turned up a little bit in that process? So it's peppered throughout the organization in different processes. So yeah, it's just ensuring that collaboration, which is a challenge for us in Anglian Water because, again, the large geographical area and kind of the dispersed nature of the workforce. But when you do pull the right people in together, that's when you find out that a lot of the work's already done.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
Absolutely. And the same with some of the work that EAPs do. I sat with an EAP only yesterday and they said, well, actually, we just do support. And they went, well, do you do a risk assessment on as people are coming in? And they went, well, yes, we do. I said, well, actually, that's your prevention. But they weren't thinking about and I think it's just it's something that's buzzing around in my mind, and more might into a LinkedIn post. So thank you for that.
Jonathan, you've kind of touched on, I think, some of the challenges, specifically with Anglian Water and the geographical locations and remote and distributed workers. What are some of the other challenges you might have experienced when you adopted ISO 45003?
I think as a company, we're really fortunate to have great support from our CEO. So Peter Simpson, he's a great advocate in this space. And then that, of course, then filters down. We also got peer support groups and networks. We've got Better Life Champions, and they can all help communicate the importance of this concept. One of the challenges, I guess, there is still that stigma around mental health. It's so much more improved. There's very few now, but there's still people who may say they don't believe in mental health and they don't have mental health. And it's that inability to separate mental health and mental illness. So part of the work is that constant banging of the drum, that constant education and awareness piece to ensure that it's we have that holistic approach towards this. And again, that comes back to terminology and communication. I think when I started off in Occ Health, we just talked about mental health and we talked about physical health, and they were the two camps. And now it overlaps with inclusion, sustainability, and well-being, and there's lots of different nuances between all of them, and that's still a big debate. So one of our biggest challenges is how we communicate this to the workforce. And I really like the transactional model of communication, so that parent, adult, child. And if we speak to our employees in that parent manner, which at times, sometimes you have to, because it's a safety element, or, the messages have to get across. But if we constantly do that, we get that child response, which is, it could be moaning, or it could be, oh, this isn't how we used to do things, that kind of thing. So really important, we try to have that adult on adult conversation to help share the power, share the responsibility, but also, that mutual respect then as well. And I think COVID has really helped with this. It's really helped to get the message across that this isn't just an Anglian Water thing, this is a societal thing. And like I mentioned previously, I think we've got really good success with wellness action plans. It really helps that power of checking in, having those conversations going. Other challenges, I guess, wasn't so much a challenge, but it's consideration going forward as far as who is completing these risk assessments. So with such a large business, with so many different business units, is one representation from different teams? Do we really know what's going down in the ground? So the next step would be to take this risk assessment and make sure we have good conversations with different business units to find out it's a true reflection of what is actually happening on the ground. But it's quite a new process for us, and I hate the term, we started that journey, but I'm sure sort of more challenges will come along as it continues to evolve. Really.
Yeah, fantastic. I like the conversation that you were having around mental health versus mental illness, but then you kind of touched on the diversity and inclusion lens, and I think something that's coming up in this space around stigma is the additional lens of an underrepresented or underserved member of a community when it comes to talking about some of this stuff, whether it be based in religion or faith or ethnicity, or even generational, because that adds another complexity to it, which I think as you then start to explore when you go into different business areas or different business units, who are those leaders and how has their mind framed around some of this? So some of those barriers or areas for opportunities to, I think, which is quite exciting for you, it is the journey, but it's going to have those complexities as you broaden the scope, I suppose, of it as well.
It's a natural byproduct of that, going through that, isn't it, John? That you start to see things in a different way, and that journey doesn't just stop with certification. If anything, might distress people, I'd say it starts, because you learn from that, and you have a mature and robust system, but you have to continue to have that robust system. That process, so obviously, John, that process is one that you continue to grow into. It doesn't just sort of end with you getting certification. It's very much how you grow as an organisation, and you learn more and more about it.
Definitely, yeah. It's not just a one-off award. It helps keep us accountable, and what the assessors will be looking for is continued growth as well. So, some of the outcomes for the assessments were all about opportunities for improvement. Mm-hmm. So there may not things that we will change, but definitely we'll consider, have a look at. There's obviously non-conformities, major and minor, and it gives us that opportunity to, constantly grow, which is great.
Awesome. I'm going to ask you a really easy question to finish. Well, not really finishing because you've still got a final takeaway, but just this simple question, obviously. What is your prediction of the wellbeing landscape in the UK?
Really, really tough question. And love to hear your thoughts on it as well, and see what your crystal ball says. I think mine's a little damaged with all the radical changes that have happened over the last 5 years. There's a bit of a disconnect at the moment as far as I feel at the moment there's never been so much more emphasis put on health and well-being. Yet we have highest records of sickness absence. So Office of National Statistics talked about it going up to 2.6%, which is the highest since 2004. And, the reasons for that may seem a bit obvious, sort of with COVID. And at the start of COVID, we would talk about the footprints of a pandemic and the different waves. So that first wave being the immediate death and mortality of COVID-19. The second wave, the non-COVID conditions, people still breaking their legs, but it's having an impact. And the third wave, the impact on chronic conditions. So all of these waves, they kind of peaked and then they came down. Whereas this fourth wave, which was there from the start, was all about the psychological impact of COVID. And it hasn't really kind of come down yet. And it's kind of whether it is to do with trauma, burnout, PTSD, and that's not just about what has happened, but what might happen as well. We're all still in a bit of a COVID hangover, I think. I think it's improved, and we're still getting used to the new ways of working. Not many of us actually kind of stopped and reflected at what a crazy time that was. But what I'm seeing at the moment is two kind of hidden illnesses. So the first one's around MSK, as far as agile working, people working from home, kitchen tops and all sorts of different locations, work on their laptop with no external keyboards for well over an hour. And we've got, you've got all the DSE regs and online assessments, but, are people being compliant? And the other one is around mental health and people have that insight, what's best as far as how often they come into the office and how often they stay at home. And they enjoy the flexibility of working from home, but over time, they start to get disconnected. They start to lose those relationships with co-workers, those kind of things. So they're two concerns in the sense that they aren't evident. They kind of chip away. So it may not be an issue 1 week, or the week after, but slowly your health may deteriorate as a result. The other concern that's probably not so hidden is just that financial pressure or the cost of living and the impact on mental health. So Mental Health Foundation talk about a third of people concerns about their financial well-being also suffer with anxiety and poor mental health. But I want to be optimistic in this space. You have to get up in the morning. So thinking positively, the first one's around the rapid advancement in technology. So even though that caused some digital anxiety among employees, there's also been rapid advancement in technology with health screening. So post-pandemic, British Heart Foundation are talking about there's a lot more cardiovascular disease than there ever was. So ensuring that we've got access to this advanced screening would be a real benefit. And understand that people can get screened sort of over 40 now, which is great. In Anglian Water within the Occ Health team, we did, as a quick example, simple Know Your Numbers campaign, measure glucose, cholesterol levels, that kind of thing. But if people met a certain criteria, they were put forward for cardiac screening, which was they had a ECG sent out to them in the post. They wore it for a week and they sent it back. And then the consultant would get in touch with the results. And just that accessibility to healthcare, where you don't even have to leave the house. It comes to you, you wear it for a week, and you get a week's analysis of your heart condition. It's just fantastic. So yeah, advancement in technology is a really exciting time. The other positive at the moment, there's an open consultation happening in government around tax incentives for Occ Health support. So the number of people working in the UK with long-term health conditions is at an all-time high. So 1 in every 13 people will be off work long-term sick. And we know work is good for you. We know it's good for your physical and mental health. And we know the longer you're off work, the harder it is to return. So making Occ Health more accessible to people that don't have it will only be a good thing as well. We mentioned about data early on, and that need to report and benchmark against other kind of industries is really important. I think most are a little nervous about publicly reporting, but I think that's the way it's going to go, which will be a good thing because it'll help people become more accountable. And the last thing I'd really like to see, I don't know who, what, why, or how, but how do we mandate some things around health and safety? So two of the things that have had a huge impact would be when people were made to wear a seatbelt and when people were made to stop smoking in public. And that was because it was the law. So what's the next thing that we can mandate to improve everyone's sort of health and safety from a psychosocial well-being point of view?
That was a very thorough answer. Thank you. But, it's interesting. There's a book that came out that I've quoted before by an American academic called The Psychology of Pandemics. And all of what you just said was reported in that book. So it was very much predictable from the 1917 pandemic that this is what would happen. We'd have these characteristics. What is very different from 1917 to now is the different types of businesses and structures and systems. And we have, obviously IT systems that increase the probability of higher demands and risks, that psychosocial risks we didn't necessarily have before. But yeah, it's actually a lot predictable and everything. So if you get a chance to read, it's only 120 pages. It's called The Psychology of Pandemics, and it covers all of those areas. But so yeah, thank you very much. That's a pretty good overview of the landscape.
It was someone in my team that kind of made us aware of it was a simple illustration, but it really, really powerful at saying, yes, this is a physical pandemic, but it's also going to be a mental, and it's not going to be just for the time of COVID. This is something that's going to last, for many years after.
Yeah. I think one thing I'll you touched on it earlier around the transactional communication process. And I think for me, I'd like to see more of a shift towards this adult to adult paradigm conversation. But I think talking about some of the stuff we've touched on, there is so much uncertainty and there is so much fear. And if we think of fear as an emotion and we detach work, we detach home, we just think of it purely as an emotion, how hard is it to sometimes adult from a place of fear? Because often fear can be embedded in trauma and it's childlike response. And I think often when we're talking about taking responsibility, looking at data, comes from a place of that unknown. And so in a world of uncertainty and in a world of quite a lot of control. So I think it's a very interesting space for some of these kinds of conversations as we progress out of, like you say, the COVID hangover. But we know that there's this huge psychological cloud that we're trying to figure our way through it.
I've heard, Professor Neil Greenberg kind of talk about post-traumatic stress and this whole element of not necessarily an incident that's happened, but it's that fear of what might happen, would also be classed as sort of type 2 traumas. And again, they're ones that sort of happen over a period of time and chip away at you. But yeah, uncertainty is one of the biggest kind of feelings of anxiety that people have, and the landscape changed so much over the last 5 years that concern what's going to be next.
Mm-hmm. That's a whole, again, another podcast, Pete. But Jonathan, it's been amazing and extremely insightful, and just wonderful to connect on something that is so important to all three of us, I think. So I'd love for one final takeaway for our listeners today.
One final takeaway. May sound a bit cheesy, but I think it's that whole prevention is better than cure. So going through the process of 45,003, it was quite evident early on that we were great at that resource sort of point of view. We had virtual GP, private healthcare, mental health self-referral, EAP. We had apps, we got bibliotherapy, all sorts of things. And the question was, how can we be better at that preventative approach as well? So how can we ensure compliance over our team risk assessments, our personal individual risk assessments, that kind of thing? So a lot more focus on what I would class as sort of prehabilitation and not just that rehabilitation sort of that place. I think it's really important again to frame things positively. There's a lot of spotlight on neurodiversity at the moment, and 20% of most workforces, being in the neuro minority, and the real focus on what the issues are and the weaknesses, and forgetting about there's a whole range of strengths within this as well, as far as people being hyper focused or creativity and that kind of innovation space as well. And I guess the last one, we tend to work on like an 80-20 rule, as far as 80% of the things we do, we want it to be evidence-based. 20% we want to maybe trailblaze and try new things, but really important to keep it simple, do things that are evidence-based. And especially when it comes to mental health, everyone's always looking for that panacea, that holy grail, what's going to be the missing piece of the jigsaw that's going to solve everything. And the answers have been around for a long time. It's doing the simple things well, as far as having a really good conversation. And sometimes that's all it needs. Sorry, did you ask for one thing? I know.
Have
so it's not all down to mindfulness then?
It's apparently not. No. I read a report. Doing tango is just as effective as mindfulness. So, yeah, might bring that in.
Oh my god, I should try that. I'm not very good at dancing, but that would certainly help with my hyperactivity. Tangoing. Should we do some tangoing next time we meet face to face, Hayley?
Yes, Pete, I'm up for it.
Okay.
Get a date in the diary. I'll meet you in London.
You wear
but
flats?
I'm just as bad. I'm not
flats?
very good. Yeah, I'll wear flats, but I'm not good at following. So you better be a good leader.
There's a size differential between us. You wear flats. I'll have to wear the biggest human heels.
Yeah.
Right. But therefore, we end our podcast as we normally do, and thanking our guest. Thank you, John, for coming along, and thank you for giving us insight to the whole experience of 45,003 and how you see the well-being space coming along. And it's every guest has so much stuff that we learn, particularly some of those things that I broke them down. I'm ready for those. But obviously, for our listeners, please do listen on the various different types of podcasts that you have, be it on Apple, on YouTube, on a range of things. Have I missed out any, Hayley? Because I'm never good with lists, am I?
No, you've done well. Anywhere that you're able to get the podcast, Spotify. So yeah, just keep listening, follow, like, and I think, Jonathan, if you're okay, you might get some hits on LinkedIn. People might ask a couple more questions. But yeah, connect with us on LinkedIn, Pete and myself as well. And we look forward to hearing some feedback on how you found this podcast.
Thank you very much. Yes, and have a great time. And we're off to a rainy England.
Where's the summer?
Where is it? Yes, it's obviously somewhere else.
Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.